promise you, I went to the kitchen or the library before. All the upstairs. Not in the downstairs, but I didn't think.
No, that doesn't make any sense. It's in my office. Hang on.
And also, good morning. Are we going to do a dueling thing here, Anthony?
No, you're going to win.
Oh, okay.
I'll go next.
That's cool. All right. My name is Beth Andes. I'm a longtime member of this church, and it's my delight to welcome you on this gorgeous fall day that feels like summer. So, couple of things. First of all, I want to remind everybody there's a used book sale in Conover, and there's tons of really cool books. I made off with a great big bag of them yesterday, but there's some left. So please support our youth by going to the book sale after the service. Now, it's my pleasure to greet our guests, and first I'd like to ask if there's any members who might have brought a guest that they would like to introduce. If so, stand up and, yeah. Welcome, welcome. And are there any guests who came on their own who would like to stand up, please, and tell us who you are and where you're from? Awesome, awesome, welcome. Are there any others? And for those who may not, oh, is there, I'm sorry. Welcome. Yes, in the back. Welcome. Anyone else? And if you're not brave enough to stand up, you are welcome also.
I was so excited a while ago because we're going to learn a new hymn today. This is a new closing song that we'll put in our regular repertoire of songs that we sing at the end of the service. If you would like to get or need to see the music, it's number 1058 in the teal hymnal, if you want to grab one. Otherwise, we're going to learn it. Sarah's going to help us teach it. So the first line,
Ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere.
Sing that again.
Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere.
One more time.
Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere.
The second line is,
Its
spiritual works of love. It's ritual works of love.
First two lines together. Here we go.
We are the religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple of space, its shrine, the good heart.
Just that much again.
We are the religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple of space, its shrine, the good heart.
The last two lines are.
Its creed of truth, its ritual works of love.
One more time.
We are the religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple of space, its shrine, the good heart. Its creed of truth, its ritual works of love. I think we're going to like that one. That's cool. Good morning. Because this day teeters between summer and fall, and already it is time to prepare because winter is coming. Because this life holds both tragedy and possibility and beckons to each of us with a bright and insistent urging, and yet insufficient reassurance that anyone is in charge or has a plan or has anything at all under control. Because we arrive here with questions and worries and alarm, and yet still a stubborn joy and persistent sense of wonder and awe, that life remains in part beautiful, and there is so much being born even now. Because we want to be partners in this grand experiment, co-creators, compassionate challengers, and caregivers. Because we do not want to miss out on this one life that is ours. For all these reasons, we gather here in our mess and in our might, humble and harried, but here, willingly offering all of it, all of ourselves for the good, the common good, which we proclaim is not a forgotten idea, so that our gathering might bring more wisdom and courage and strength, that we might keep on with this journey of life and love, that we might together find our way, if not home, at least into the shelter of one another. So says my colleague, Gretchen Haley. Therefore, come, let us gather in the light of this chalice flame, in this place made holy by memory and hope, and here rededicate ourselves to lives of compassion, deeds of justice, and a message of wholeness and hope to the world. Hang on. There you go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Charlotte, and I light this chalice for a free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlotte. Now I invite all of us to rise in body or spirit and speak once again the words of our community's covenant. Together we affirm Goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And let's remain risen for our opening hymn. Well, some of the people that I've really missed while I've been away have been the children. So I'm wondering if you guys would come down and talk to me for a minute. Will you come? Okay. Thank you so much. Excellent. Hi. Come on down. You can sit. We're going to be here for just a minute. Okay, cool. It's so nice to see you. And I want to talk to you for a few minutes today about calendars. Who knows what a calendar is? What's a calendar?
It's a thing that helps you keep track of dates.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. And did you know that there is more than one kind of calendar? Yeah, okay, good. You're ahead of me. There are lots of different kinds of calendars. Now, who knows what season we're in right now? What do you think?
Summer. Fall?
I think we're in fall because what happened this week? Does anybody know what happened? Yeah.
It changed it when it was still 100 and kind of changed the seasons.
It changed the seasons, right. Does anybody know what that big word is for the day that the seasons change? Yeah.
Fall solstice?
The solstice is what happens in the summer and the winter. There's another big word for what happens in the fall and the spring. Anybody? Yeah. Equinox, yay, good. So we had the fall equinox this week on the 22nd. That's right, exactly. It's easy to get those two confused, right? So we had the fall equinox, and so summer changed to fall. Some other interesting things happened on other calendars this week. Different religions have different holidays, and I think probably some of you have learned about some of those in Sunday school, or you will be learning about some of those. In the Muslim faith, the new year begins on the first day of the month of Muharram. Now, the calendar in Islam goes by the moon instead of by the sun. So that means their months are not lined up exactly with the ones of our secular American calendar. This year, the month of Muharram begins on, are you guys with me here? Hi. The month of Muharram began on September 21st, which was the day before the equinox. So the Muslim New Year started on the 21st, and on this day, many Muslims try not to eat. They fast as a way of celebrating, and they also say special prayers for the new year. And the other interesting thing is it is forbidden for anybody to fight or have a war during that month, and especially on the first day. So no fighting on that first day of the new year, which I think is a really good idea. Also, the Jewish faith has a New Year holiday that begins on Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the month of Tishrei, and the Jewish calendar is also different from our secular American calendar. So Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, also moves around the year from one year to the next, and this year it began on September 21st, and it lasts for 2 days. So we had all three of those things happen together. We had the Muslim New Year, we had the Jewish New Year, and we had the autumn equinox, thank you. And that's very unusual that all of those things came on the same 2 days. It probably will never happen again in your lifetimes. So this is kind of an interesting coexistence, and so I want to wish you a happy Muslim New Year and a happy Jewish New Year and a happy New Year in your religious education classes here. And so I want you to repeat after me. Can you do this? Happy autumn. Happy autumn, okay. And Happy New Year. Okay. And so now we'll let you go to your classes with some song. The Unitarian Universalist Service Committee is an outreach organization within our association that brings the witness of UU values into situations of need around the world. One of its operating principles is never to descend upon a community from the outside, but always to partner with indigenous organizations and leaders who can speak to the capacities and hopes that people have for themselves and decide how best to utilize the resources that the UU Service Committee can offer. The UUSC will be working to aid relief efforts in Houston following Hurricane Harvey, in Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria, and in Mexico City following the recent earthquake there. They will work with local Unitarian Universalists to assist churches that have suffered damage to their facilities, as well as member families that have been displaced or had extensive losses. This week's collection from All Souls will be allocated to the UUSC's work in Mexico City. Any support beyond what is needed to make sure that UU members are sheltered and safe will go to local organizations on the ground, helping underserved individuals and communities. Unless you have been living in a media-free zone all week, you are aware of the extensive damage caused in the most populous city on the American continent. I invite your generous contributions to help recovery from this deadly earthquake to move forward. You can make the check to All Souls and put special offering in the memo line. This morning's offering will now be given and gratefully received.
And now let us say together the words of dedication for the offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create a just and compassionate society.
You guys probably know I'm not Sharon. We swapped. I'm Keely Schneider. I'm going to be reading The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming, hardly those words are out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with a lion body and the head of a man. A gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again. But now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born?
For the past 2 years, Donald Trump has taken up an amazing amount of my brain space. My brain has apparently decided that it's not interested in devoting more neurons to that guy. There's nothing more to be learned about Trump's mixture of ignorance, insecurity, and narcissism. Every second spent on his bluster is more degrading than informative. Now, a lot of people are clearly still addicted to Trump. For some of us, Trump bashing has become educated class meth. We derive endless satisfaction from feeling morally superior to him. And as Leon Wieseltier put it, affirmation is the new sex. But what lessons are people drawing from this debacle, and how will those lessons shape what comes next? It's clear that Trump is not just a parenthesis. After he leaves, things will not snap back to normal. Instead, he represents the farcical culmination of a lot of dying old orders, demographic, political, even moral. And what comes after will be a reaction against rather than a continuing from. Donald Trump has smashed through the behavior standards that once governed public life. His election demonstrates that as the unifying glue of the mainline culture receded, the country has divided into at least 3 blocks. White evangelical Protestantism that, at least in its public face, seems to care more about eros than caritas. Secular progressivism that is spiritually formed by feminism, environmentalism, and the quest for individual rights. And realist nationalism that gets its manners from reality TV and its spiritual succor from in-group, out-group solidarity. But where are people going to go for a new standard of decency? They're not going to go back to the old WASP idea. That's dead. Trump revealed the vacuum, but who is going to fill it? And with what? I could describe a similar vacuum when it comes to domestic policy thinking, to American identity, to America's role in the world. Trump exposes the void, but doesn't fill it. That's why the reaction against Trump is now more important than the man himself.
Yeah. Religious community is a powerful force, but it has its limitations. It cannot hold back the hurricane winds or stop the slow grinding of tectonic plates that makes for earthquakes. It cannot change the outcome of past elections, nor prevent the misuse of power by corrupted souls. Some would say that the gods can do these things, but if that is so, we live in a world where they mostly choose not to, and we must cope with the consequences of natural forces, others' decisions, and our own behavior. I have had an opportunity over the past several months to consider once again what religious community is and what it is for. To a lifelong humanist like myself, here in early 21st century America, coming from a position of white cisgender privilege, the answer is not necessarily all that obvious. Growing up as a Unitarian Universalist, the first answer I learned was expressed by the title of our hymn book at the time. Some of you will remember it, Hymns for the Celebration of Life. The purpose of the church was to invite us to pause in the busyness of our success and rejoice together. Sure, we all had our share of what we today would call first world problems, but we wanted not to lose sight of the conviction that life was precious, that love was essential, that if we stopped to think about it, we all had a lot to be grateful for. And out of that gratitude, we heard a call to share abundance with those who had less, to be helpful to people who had problems more daunting than our own, and to fix promptly the occasional ways in which our democratic society fell a little short of equal justice. There was a sweetness at the heart of this vision of church that I still cherish, but it came with a heaping helping of unreflective privilege, as well as a denial of the deeper kinds of human pain that were present, even from our own positions of good fortune and cultural power. I tend to think that many of my peers who drifted away from the liberal church without any particular rancor, but finding no urgency to hold them there, simply got nothing out of this experience. Some of them, and some congregations, tried upping the anger quotient of the justice message as a way of accessing more feeling and energy. But this alone was a cheap thrill that didn't last for long. It also created a disconnect between the celebrate life function and the screw the system function that often left the church divided and uncertain of its purpose. There will always be a part of me, and I suspect a part of us all, that resonates to that simple invitation to rejoicing and gratitude. We are alive. The world is at times beautiful. Love and kindness and creativity are gifts that we do not earn. To forget these truths is to become crabby and mean-spirited at a very basic level. Surely part of the purpose of the church is to help us stay open to that authentic impulse of praise and thanks, and to give it expression in community. However, the world is other things in addition to beautiful, and there is more to life than middle-class American consumer comfort. If we weren't forced to acknowledge that in the 1950s, it has been made abundantly clear these days. The combination of computers and satellites brings all the suffering of the globe into our vision in exquisite detail. We know in advance that Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Donald are coming. We watch the video as they make landfall. We are confronted with the victims of their assorted devastations as the overwhelming grief and tragedy unroll before our eyes. And I despair of my helplessness to prevent or to fix any of it. I believe everyone who says what we really need here is money, and I send it to the earthquake relief workers, to the ACLU lawyers and the Planned Parenthood doctors, to the sane and principled politicians, to the agencies tending to flooded neighborhoods. I could max out my credit cards and empty my savings account, and none of those needs would go away. Every little bit helps, and the losses and the suffering are still real. In the face of all this, a religious community that can only invite me to celebrate life and fix everything comes across as hopelessly naive and out of touch with reality. So I wonder, what else is it? And one of the pondering techniques I often use with this kind of question is observation. How do the other entities that identify themselves as religious communities answer this challenge? What resources of enduring wisdom do they offer to their adherents? They do encourage both celebration and generosity, apparently, no difference there, but that's not the only thing. There are two other functions that many religious communities understand themselves to have during difficult and perilous times that I invite us to consider from our uniquely pluralist and naturalistic, reason-based perspective. One is memory, and the other is prayer. Don't panic, I know. It takes some thought to understand the function of prayer as it might be meaningful to humanists like me, but hang in there. I'm going to take a swing at it and see if there's some insight we can embrace. You will let me know if I connect with what is real for you. But let's begin with memory. That's the easy part. The particular kind of memory that is specific to religious community. The theologians have a fancy word for this. Anamnesis, they call it, from the same Latin stem as amnesia. Anamnesis is the deliberate act of not forgetting, the ritual insistence that memory must not be allowed to die. The affirmation that Black lives matter, for example, is an act of anamnesis. It deliberately recalls to mind the stories of those people of color who have been victims of unjust laws, oppressive policing, corrupt judicial process, and hate crimes. Religious community exists because stories are part of what makes us human. And there are certain stories that if we forget, we become less human than we might otherwise be. In the Christian community, the story of Jesus is like that. Both his life and teaching and the manner of his death remind us of vitally important truths about life, integrity, suffering, generosity, and hope. To be true to your ideals is a risky thing, and there is no guarantee that your beautiful vision will come to pass, even if you are faithful unto death. And yet, something about that faithfulness may linger to guide and inspire others to be true to their own dreams of human kinship and justice. Do not forget. The stories of the ancient Hebrew prophets are like that too, stories that open up to me far more now than they ever did in the days when the triumph of the modern Enlightenment seemed assured. Stories of the prophets who called out the nation of the children of Israel, announcing that they had sold their integrity for the illusions of safety and their covenant promise for the prosperity of a greedy few. They were not rewarded, those prophets. They were ridiculed and punished and ignored, but they were not forgotten. Because in the end, the nation was destroyed by greed and ignorance and the scheming of the powerful and the suffering of the poor, just as the prophets had warned. In every generation, you will want to forget this. Do not forget. How are we in this liberal religious community of ours to practice anamnesis? What is it that we carry in crucial memory that together we must not forget? The most important thing, I think, is the vision of a democratic society with liberty and justice for all. It is the nature of oppression that it wants us to cast this vision aside, to see only a zero-sum game of winners and losers where we all scramble to be among the handful of victors to whom belong the spoils. If we lose sight of the principle of inherent dignity and equality before the law, of one person, one vote for everybody, of a common good and a shared prosperity, then the forces of tyranny triumph, and winner take all becomes the dominant philosophy. But our religious movement arises out of a different understanding. We come together around a different way of thinking and being in the world. It is there in our UU principles and purposes. It is there in our congregational covenant and mission. Goodwill, respect, justice, compassion, help. These ideals may be challenged, and they may be despised, and they may be mocked, but we hold on to them and hold them high. We do not forget. It is also needful to remember that we are not the first nation to confront the challenges of would-be despots, nor the first generation to go through hard times. We are not, in fact, special snowflakes, And if others have endured before us, we can face into these headwinds now. There have been natural disasters in the past. We know what we have to do to recover, even though it is hard and tedious and costly work. It has been done before. It can be done again if we are faithful to our neighbors in need. We have had willfully ignorant leaders and waves of popular prejudice before, too. What we must remember is that it is our example of respect, compassion, and the embrace of diversity, much more than any of our reasoned arguments and far more than any self-righteous resort to violence, that will be persuasive in the long run. There are no doubt many moments when it would be much more gratifying to ignore this truth and indulge our impulse to punch someone, but together, we do not forget. It is vital to remember not only the past, but the future as well. As David Brooks points out, what happens after the Trump administration will be determined by what fills the vacuum that he has demonstrated. There is no going back to the blind supremacies of the white Western European cultural hegemony. We must become either conscious oppressors or advocates and allies for a new standard of awareness, equality, and inclusion. All that we do prepares the world that our descendants will inherit. The deist sage Thomas Paine once offered this entirely humanist prayer. "I prefer peace," he said, "but if trouble must come, let it come in my time, that my children may live in peace." Religious community requires us collectively to preserve our past, not only for our own purposes, but as a resource for those who come after us, so that our trouble might be their wisdom. There is always the impulse to hide our struggles, to push away our discouragements and failures. In religious community, we bequeath the memory of both our achievements and our inadequacies, because both offer valuable lessons. We do not forget. Finally, our practice of anamnesis urges us to honor and to emulate those among us who find ways to resist the forces of violence, corruption, and greed. We sing their songs. We repeat their messages. We take inspiration from their actions. Even when they perished, like Sophie Scholl and the other members of the White Rose Society, or even when they labored in obscurity like Ella Baker, or worked in secret like Reverend André Trocmé and the citizens of Le Chambon in Nazi-occupied France, or even when they failed to stop the tides of history like the Dalai Lama, our religious community continues to tell their stories and cherish their examples. We do not forget. Okay, so let's talk for one last moment about prayer. As some of you know, I often find it helpful to think about prayer by way of its mirror image, cursing. After all, I have never met a humanist or religious naturalist who didn't believe in cursing, no matter how much they objected to the idea of prayer. And there is much about the situations in which we find ourselves just now that could merit some skillful curses. Still, it's important to have a considered understanding of cursing because, as Brooks mentions, it can get to be addictive. Trump bashing has become educated class meth, he says. We derive endless satisfaction from feeling morally superior to him. That feeling of moral superiority hits the pleasure centers of our brain a lot like a drug, and it's easy to want more and more, which can lead to self-righteousness and destroy our sense of integrity and compassion. And yet there are times when a moral repudiation of something is absolutely needed, when it is the job of religious community to issue a curse. It is our job to be willing to recognize and to name in public those actions and ideas, those bargains and claims that deserve to be condemned. The attempt to trade one person's suffering for another's advantage deserves to be condemned everywhere and always, and should be held accursed. This was the message of the Hebrew prophets, that God's curse was upon those who abused their power in such a way. It is our job as a religious community to insist upon the enduring difference between truth and lies, between the common good and selfish advantage. Accursed be the attempt to persuade us that the one is just as good as the other. It is our job as a religious community to hold accountable anyone who uses their position and privilege to bring about the destruction of people or the planet. Let them stand accursed until they shall repent and change their ways. Now, cursing is always a bit dangerous, partly because it rebounds upon the speaker at the least hint of hypocrisy, as well as because it is easily trivialized for mere annoyances. Hitting your thumb with a hammer doesn't actually have the moral gravitas to be worthy of an authentic curse, which is the origin of the term profanity. We profane the sacred power of genuine cursing when we use it to express momentary personal outrage. The thing that keeps cursing from dealing in mere spite, I believe, is our capacity to engage its opposite, authentic prayer. By that, I do not mean earnest requests that the universe suspend natural law for our own or others' benefit. For everyone who prayed for the hurricane to turn away from them, and it did, there is another who also prayed to be spared and took a direct hit. There is randomness in the physical world that we do not control. Beauty and destruction are both in its path. And as Francis Bacon warned us, nature, in order to be commanded, must be obeyed. Prayer is not magic. There are no spells to stop the storms or make the world be otherwise than it is, no matter how hard we wish. It is the essence of cultural privilege to want a quick fix for everything. But that is a false understanding of prayer. Prayer doesn't actually change anything, any more than a curse does. That is not its purpose. Its purpose is to change us. In some congregations, the version of the covenant that they use proclaims that service is our prayer. Prayer is the affirmation of what is good and beautiful and praiseworthy in the world and in our humanity, just as cursing is the repudiation of all that deserves to be condemned. Prayer is whatever inspires us to retain our moral decency and expand our human compassion, not out of guilt or fear of reprisal, but because it reflects who we most essentially are. It is saying yes to the vision of a less traumatic and pain-filled future for the world, as well as yes to the glimpses of care and generosity and hope that break through into our hearts even now. It is the task of religious community to lift up that vision and that hope, to summon us to measure our lives by its possibilities rather than by the discouragements of the present moment. Authentic prayer grounds us in something more enduring than celebration. It commits us to a life of generosity, gratitude, and reverence, to an accountability that calls upon us to withstand crisis, to endure the discomfort of change, even to sacrifice, in the service of the highest good and the deepest love that we know. This week, our Jewish neighbors begin their observance of the high holy days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the days of awe, the Day of Atonement, a time to practice anamnesis, to remember the holy demand for justice, the prophet's anguished curse, and our own complicities with prejudice and privilege. A time to seek right relations, first with our fellow human beings, and through that process, with our own conscience and ideals and the person we hope to become. Hashivenu Adonai, they pray. Adonai Eleha Venashuva, Hadesh, Yamenu Kekedem. A prayer from the Book of Lamentations. Turn us to you again, O Holy One, and we will return. Renew us as in days of old. Let us remember with intention those of our own spiritual ancestors who came through crisis and oppression and suffering in the past, who sacrificed so that we might learn both from their mistakes and from their endurance. Let us return to the paths of integrity and compassion, which are the only true paths and always have been, no matter what popular charlatans may advocate. Let us live into the community of authentic faith in the largest possibilities of the human spirit, in spite of all our disappointments and struggles, for that is who we have set out to be together. And this is no time to give up. Will you rise and join me in the Hashivenu prayer, and let's listen to Sarah sing it once, and then we'll join her twice through. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. For all these we carry in our hearts until we are together again. There is finally only one thing required of us, and that is to take life whole, the bright and dark together, to live the life that is given us with courage and humor and truth. We have such a little moment out of the vastness of time for all our wondering and loving. Therefore, let there be no half-heartedness. Rather, let the soul be ardent in its pain, in its yearning, in its praise. Then shall peace enfold our days, and glory shall not fade from our lives, and we shall not forget.